Joining me now for more, civil rights attorney and vice president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, Omar Nur al-Din, and California Republican National Committeeman, Shawn Steele. Good to see you both. Thanks for coming in. Okay, Shawn, let's start with you. A big win for the president. This took more than a year. So will Donald Trump now feel empowered? Will he be emboldened? And if so, who's next?
Actually,
which country, which religion, which group will be the target?
No, it's never been a religion. You know that, and most observers know that. The travel ban dealt with the countries that Obama himself designated as terrorist, dysfunctional societies that were producing a lot of really violent young men that would be a danger to wherever they would go to, particularly if they're unvetted. That's a fundamental part. So this wasn't like a creation that came out of Donald Trump's head. It's something that the State Department security experts have been working on for a long time. Now remember, there were three iterations that went through the so-called travel ban, but it's something that we did in World War II. You know, we had a travel ban against Japanese that were coming to the United States. Germans,
one of the worst
other parts of the world.
We should add, yeah.
Well, pardon?
One of the worst histories. You know, the Japanese internment is what you're referring to when the Japanese.
No.
Americans
Those were American citizens, right. And that was a Democrat plan by Earl Warren and FDR. They're the ones that set up the internment camps. Let's not forget it was the Democrat Party that actually did that, and that was certainly bad and evil. But I'm talking about Japanese citizens, per se, from Japan. We're not coming, let's not kid ourselves, we're not coming to California and the United States because we're fighting a war with them.
This is a little
we have a war against radical Islam. And that's something that's worldwide, that's costing a lot of lives every single day in the Central African Republic. So it is a religious ban. It's a war with radical Islam, so it is a religious ban. Well, no, of course not. Oh. It's the people that are perpetrating that kind of, if not against Muslims per se, but against radical Muslims, absolutely. No, and they're the ones that are doing the damage.
What are you expecting in the coming months from this administration? And you know, feel free to reply to Shawn.
Yeah, well, I think this does embolden the president. I think this decision tells the president, go full force, carry on your agenda. And it's not just against Muslims. Part of the president's agenda is to minimize legal immigration into this country, to close our borders to both legal immigrants and people seeking asylum. That's what we've seen in the last few weeks on our southern border. That's what this Muslim travel ban does, and this gives the president a green light to continue on that agenda. And you know, and I think this was about Muslims. You know, the president made that clear, and Chief Justice John Roberts' majority opinion says, you know, it's not our job to denounce the president's statements. Well, that may be true. It's not their job to denounce them, but it's to actually vet the president's intentions. That's what religious discrimination law and the First Amendment calls on the court to do. And today, the opinion by Chief Justice Roberts abdicated that authority.
I want to read part of an op-ed from the Yale law professor, Peter Schuck, who he actually believes the Supreme Court got it right, but he goes on to say, the fact that the court ruled correctly, however, does not mean that the status quo is acceptable. The most fearful aspect of the court's decision is already evident in Mr. Trump's immediate, triumphalist response to it. The decision will certainly embolden him in his claims of vast presidential power and indifference to the rule of law, whether on immigration or in other policy areas. So, Shawn, even those who see this ruling as being correct in law have fears about what it now means for a president who actually doesn't have, at least in many instances, a lot of respect for the rule of law and the Constitution.
Actually, that's not true. He has a great deal of respect for the rule of law. He's the one that appointed the Supreme Court justice. He's appointing a lot of judges. It's not him. It's an administration. There's a lot of people involved in the decision-making. It's not Trump. It's taken Trump a long time to kind of learn that because he's never done the presidential or the political agenda before. But the fact that he actually changed the travel ban 3 times, went through a lot of heads, a lot of thought, a lot of people, and became a much more reasonable approach, in my view. The stuff that a candidate says on the campaign stump, you look at any of the presidents in the past, and you put it in practical policy, it's absurd. And some of the things that you had right now it was firepower. The thing is that Trump understands the limits of power. He understands that he has to go through a lot of people just to get anything done. It's frustrating. He gets on Twitter, but even his Twitter account's gotten a lot better in the last 12 months.
Okay. Well, a key part of the ruling from the Supreme Court dealt with the statements that the president made during the campaign as a candidate. Here's CNN's chief legal analyst, Jeffrey Toobin.
What the Supreme Court is saying here is that, you know, President or candidate Trump may have said things that it is easy to denounce, but this order itself is within the core powers of the presidency, not just Donald Trump's presidency, but all presidencies.
So, in other words, stuff like this that we're about to hear from Donald Trump had no relevance.
we're having problems with Muslims coming into the country.
We have to look at the Muslims, and we have to do something. We must find out what is going on. We have to do it.
And all this seems kind of odd, Omar, because you touched on this. And the example I want to use is just a few weeks ago in deciding, the wedding cake case, which was gay rights versus religious freedoms. The Supreme Court warned that when there is even slight suspicion of animosity to religion underlying government action, all public officials must pause to remember their own high duty to the Constitution and to the rights it secures. So is there a different standard in the US for Christian intolerance as opposed to Muslim intolerance?
I think that's right. In the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, the court went out of its way. It scoured the record to find a smidgen of religious animus towards the baker. And there was 1 or 2 commissioners on a 7-commission panel that had said some things along the lines of religion has been used historically to do horrible things. And the court found there that that was intolerable and reversed the commission's findings. But here, where we had ample evidence from the president of his religious animus, the court backtracked. And this is, I agree with the professor in terms of the implications of it. I think the case was wrongly decided and the dissent got it right, is that this gives the president and the executive a national security flag. You just put up the flag and it's game over. It puts things beyond judicial review, and that's not the way our democracy is supposed to work.
And this was a 5-4 decision, Sean, which begs the question, what would the decision have been if the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, the Republican, had not denied President Obama's choice for the Supreme Court, instead handing it out to Neil Gorsuch? And it seems McConnell, with this tweet that he put out today, shaking hands with Neil Gorsuch, the justice that Trump appointed, it seems almost like McConnell is trolling those who were opposed to the ban.
I think he's actually quite pleased with the result. Look, saying that this is the worst decision ever made by the U.S. Supreme Court overlooks some of the bad decisions in the past, a lot of bad economic ones, particularly the great one, the Dred Scott decision.
Dred Scott,
yeah. It's silly, it's embarrassing, and I love the way the left keeps jumping off the ledge. And I want them to keep get more hysterical, keep attacking public officials, keep shouting and screaming and calling everybody that disagrees with them a racist. And you know what? Republicans are going to continue to win, and it's a great thing. Most Americans aren't buying this nonsense. Now, what Trump, the candidate, said is not what he's saying today.
There are actions within this administration. I'll give you an example. Words matter, and this may not seem like a big deal, but here's part of the old mission statement from the Citizen and Immigration Service. USCIS secures America's promise as a nation of immigrants. Back in February, that was changed to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services administers the nation's lawful immigration system. The words, promise of a nation of immigrants were specifically removed from the mission statement. And Omar, it may have been a myth, but this is what people believed in it. It's sort of a bedrock principle that, that this country was founded on. And there is a very specific decision to remove that from, from a government department.
Yeah, this is part of a larger narrative and theme that the administration is painting, is that people, you're not welcome, that Muslims, you're not welcome, that Islam is a foreign religion, when in fact that's not true. Islam and Muslims have been here since before the nation's foundings, were vital contributors to this country, both Muslims that were born here and Muslims that immigrated here. And so this is furthering the Trump administration's, this decision emboldens and furthers the Trump administration's policy, which is to change the narrative of America.
And Sean, why make that change? Why was that change necessary, to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service?
I believe that we're a nation of immigrants. We need a lot more immigrants. We need to have a totally different standard. Chain migration's not very good. Allowing people to walk through the border.
So you can argue over the process, but this seems to be changing the very nature of the country.
No, my wife has relatives that have been waiting for years to come here, and they passed all the tests, paid the dues. So we need immigration just to keep our country healthy, young, and vital. So there's no problem with that. But I want to say something perfectly clear here, and I hope Omar agrees with me. There's no nation on God's green earth that has been more tolerant for Muslims than any other place in the universe other than a Muslim-dominated society. Would you agree with that?
I actually think America is a better place to be a Muslim than most Muslim-majority countries, and I want to keep it that way.
That is profound.
And I want to keep it that way.
I have not heard that.
And that's why this country doesn't have the same problems that Europe is having right now. But I want to get on. We're going to finish up here with the Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who was in Los Angeles on Tuesday. He spoke out against those who oppose the administration's policy of separating families at the border.
So the rhetoric we hear from the other side on this issue, as on many others, has become radicalized. We hear views on television today that are on the lunatic fringe, frankly. And what is perhaps more galling is the hypocrisy. These same people live in gated communities, many of them, and are featured at events where you have to have an ID to even come in and hear them speak. They like a little security around themselves, and if you try to scale the fence, believe me, they'll be even too happy to have you arrested and separated from your children. If they would like to see that.
Omar, it seems kind of beyond inappropriate for the highest law officer in the land to be making jokes about kids taken away from their parents.
Well, he gets it from his boss. So this isn't something the president has joked about very serious matters and has changed the entire decorum of the Oval Office. So it's not surprising to see Jeff Sessions, who actually the president hasn't been happy with of late, try and get in good favor by following the president's lead. And that's a sad state of affairs for our executive branch.
Do you think that's
John, I was trying to find something that was terrible about that feed, because most of the, look, this is something Obama. John, let's get to the truth of the matter. We can talk about the rhetoric and the imagery and the fake Time magazine story of having the girls separated from their mother.
About 2,500 kids separated from their mums and dads.
Much of this is a hoax.
It's not a hoax. They're numbers from the government.
John,
hear
me just for 1 second. This idea of separation from children is very emotional, and it's something properly revulsive to, I think, most people. Obama started it 8 years ago. And the same type of activities that were taken, according to Jay Johnson, just 36 hours ago, he was the former director of the Homeland Security, said, we did the same thing, we did more of it, and we didn't have a choice, and I have no regrets for that. This is Obama's #1 pick. If you're going to pick on Trump, be consistent, be honest, go after Obama.
Sean, you are muddying the waters. It's not apples for apples. You're comparing apples and oranges, but we're going to leave it there. Sean and Omar, thank you. Thank you. Okay.